Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio, and welcome to the first edition of our new podcast, building on what has been a very successful and on a personal level, very enjoyable conversation that we've been having each week on Primetime Politics. And joining us here on CPAC on this journey are three incredible journalists and individuals. See how I'm buttering you up before we begin? Robert Fife is the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail, Tonda MacCharles, the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star, and Joël-Denis Bellavance, the Ottawa Bureau Chief for La Presse. Hello to all three of you, and thanks for being
Michael.
on this journey.
Thank you for the invitation.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. So listen, let's get down to business here. We're wrapping up the first week of this fall session, and while many priorities were laid out, I do want to focus on law and order, because what we saw on the Friday, Sean Fraser, the Justice Minister, essentially introducing new hate crime legislation, 4 new criminal code offenses, making it illegal to promote hatred against an identifiable group using symbols of hate. Take a listen to what we heard from the Justice Minister.
We are moving forward with establishing a new crime of hate. This will operate by layering on top of existing criminal offenses with a new offense that will specifically target hate where that crime was committed because of their motivation of hatred towards the victim.
Again, that was Sean Fraser, the Justice Minister. The bill also aims to prevent intimidation and obstruction at religious institutions. Now, there are already hate crimes on the book. So why the need to introduce this? Why make it the government priority? Because this is the first crime and order bill from this government ball.
Well, look, I think we've seen since October 7th of 2 years ago, the killing of 1,200 Israelis, and many of them women and children, as well as the war that's gone on in Gaza, that our own streets have seen protests that have in some cases been quite ugly, going after synagogues or Jewish schools, going after Jewish businesses. The display of Hamas flags and by right-wing groups, Nazi flags. And equally, there have, although not on the same level, but there's been desecration of Muslim mosque and harassment of Muslims. And I think the government has reached to the point where we've got to send a message to people that you cannot do this. So these things are on the books, and the police have not enforced them. But this is really a message to the police that you've got to start dealing with this on a much more serious level.
Well, certainly it expands their arsenal, if you will, Bob, because, we do have, again, existing laws, but then you can layer these on. Talk to us about why the government wants to make this a priority, Tonda.
I mean, the entire Canadian population has been riveted by what's happened in the Middle East, and the conflict and the divisions it's fostered have played out in our society. In a sense, it's a bit of a hangover from previous Parliament, and it's also sort of a bit of a low-hanging fruit. Everything else that they have to do is going to be big, complex, and require money. So this is a first early piece of crime legislation that a lot of the parties might agree on. So maybe it's easy to get through Parliament. That might explain why it's the first. In short order, we're expecting to see other crime legislation, bail reform, for example, and very quickly this fall we'll get other pieces of legislation where it'll be harder for the government to get some unanimity or consensus or any support really in some aspects of their massive bills to regulate online harms or to deal with AI, for example. So I think that explains some of it. Who's going to be their dance partner on this? I couldn't say just yet, but because I haven't seen the other parties' reaction yet. But I think that's not something that's going to, I think, get a lot of opposition at this stage, certainly from the Conservatives. I can see them getting some Conservative support for this.
Joël-Denis?
Well, the Bloc Québécois, for one, has been pushing for harder sentences or harder measures on hate crime. There was a speech made by Adil Sharkawi in Montreal that encourage hate towards the Jewish people, and that got a lot of attention in Quebec. And there's also been a push by the provinces for Ottawa to, adopt more real, convincing measures to fight crimes in Canada. It's been the topic of discussions at the last Council of Federation, and so there is sort of almost unanimity or consensus among the provinces, and I guess that consensus is also slowly but surely going to the House of Commons. And I expect, most political parties in the House of Commons, although it's a minority, to support those measures when it comes to a vote.
But in any crime legislation, the big question is enforcement. I mean, if already the laws that are on the books have difficulty being enforced by police, they fall down the priority list when the police are dealing with so many other crimes. And so in this case, also, who is going to be the agency or the body responsible for really giving wings to this legislation? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
On any given weekend, there are protests around the national capital, and there's a police presence. But their job there is to really kind of keep the peace and not get people too riled up or cause conflict or instigate anything happening. And so, the sight of some of these symbols might be something they'll be looking for, but I think that they'll be all in a very delicate balance about enforcement. Enforcement's going to be the big issue.
But I think less so, because you're seeing protests outside of synagogues or mosques, for example, and some ugly stuff going on there, or outside of Jewish schools and that.
Meant to intimidate, right?
And that's got to stop.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really, really good message. And the other issue that's going to be on the government's plate is bail reform. This is a big issue. The police have already, police chiefs have talked to the Prime Minister about the problem of, the premiers have talked about the problem of perennial offenders getting out of jail very, very quickly and then recommitting some horrendous crime. And the Conservatives are advocating a three-strike rule. So if you've done 3 crimes in a row, you never get any bail. I'm not sure that's the answer. And the government, unless Tonda knows no more about the justice file than I do, but we haven't really seen what the government is looking to deal with this bail reform.
I'm going to jump in here because I do want to talk about bail as well. And yes, the federal government, the Carney government says they will introduce some type of amendments to bail reform. The Conservatives not waiting, though. They use their first opposition day of this new session, or this fall session, to introduce this 3 strikes or you're out bill. Take a listen to Pierre Poilievre from earlier this week.
All of these scumbags should have been in jail. And if conservative laws had been in place, they would have been in jail.
I don't want to minimize the importance of it because, to your point, Bob, we've heard police chiefs, we've heard people involved in criminal justice calling for bail reform. But I do wonder, because this is the first move from the Conservatives. Do the Liberals, does the Mark Carney government risk losing the narrative on this, as the Liberals did with affordability, that it is the Conservatives moving first on touching bail, Bob?
Well, I'm not quite sure of that, because the government gets the credit for bringing in the legislation. It depends on how tough it is, and whether he can be successful in tearing it apart. There will be, I think, some debate within the Liberal caucus about it. I know members of the Black caucus are concerned that any kind of bail is not going to be aimed at Indigenous and Black people who often get discriminated the most in the justice system. So, but I don't know what they're planning on doing. And once we have a sense of what the government's doing, I suspect it'll be very along the lines of what the police associations have been talking about, but I just don't know.
What is interesting about that dynamics is, since the Liberal government was re-elected, we've seen the 2-track issues: the economy and justice system, and those 2 tracks are big big issues for the Conservative Party. So clearly, the government is again on Mr. Carney's watch going to center-right issues that are facing the nations, and then so it leaves a little place for the progressive issues like the environment, for example. So that, I think, is an element that the government cannot neglect, because it could lead to the rise again to the NDP or the progressive forces in Canada.
But I also think that the government is alive now to the fact that those are the biggest concerns on Canadians' minds too. I mean, you go across this country and you don't have to tap very far to find out pocketbook, economic, household issues, one thing, and the problems that people face on the streets, be it violence, property crime, things that they're looking at as fallout from the opioid crisis in every city and town in this country. People are aware that there's higher rates of break-ins and whatnot. So crime is a big thing for the population. And I think that the Liberals are trying to also respond to that, because it is a big winner for the Conservatives, but they also have to actually do something about it. And the devil will be in the details of their bail reform. I don't think you'll see them adopt the slogans, 3 strikes, you're out, because that's a slogan that a previous Conservative government used in its judicial bail reforms and was struck down by the courts. And so, you know, somewhere in there, I think you'll see the Liberals try and find space to make repeat offenses, serious violent crimes, those things, aggravating factors on sentencing, but not impose mandatory minimums or use that kind of language around it, because they still have campaigned on the idea that it's proper in a democracy to give judges and the courts their discretion and the power to decide on sentencing after hearing all the facts.
And the courts have pushed back whenever their discretion is being limited by any form of legislation.
And she's right on that, because you've got to go after the really violent people, but you don't want to sweep up people, like large numbers of Indigenous and Black people who may have committed smaller crimes because of their socioeconomic status, for example, and then deny them bail. So I would imagine we're going to get a more middle-of-the-road approach to this than the Conservative one.
And they'll probably target, right? They'll probably target crimes. They'll target things like intimate partner violence for more serious offenses, more serious consequences in terms of some things. They may try to do, again, some kind of reverse onus on bail for serious offenses. In other words, rather than automatically assuming that an accused person, unless they're an immediate risk or a flight or danger, should be released until the trial happens, they'll put the onus on the defense to say why they shouldn't be held, why they should be released. And that's, you know, right now, that's some space where the Liberals can move that would politically address what they see as the issue, but not adopt the Conservative slogans.
Okay, so we're going to have to watch, because again, the Conservatives are going to, there'll be a debate sometime next week on their bill. The government says they're going to introduce their own. I want to move on right now, because before we're done, I also want to talk about the U.S. Ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra, because he spoke to the Halifax Chamber. Clip a minute, but this is a good clip. This is so he addressed the Halifax Chamber of Commerce this week, and he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that he was disappointed that he came to this country and disappointed in the anti-American sentiment in Canada. Take a listen right now to the U.S. Ambassador to this country.
I'm disappointed that I came to Canada, a Canada that it is very, very difficult to find Canadians who are passionate about the American-Canadian relationship. Okay? You ran a campaign where, you know, it was anti-American, elbows up, Me Too. You know, it was an anti-American campaign. That has continued. That's disappointing.
Now, of course, you know, Canadian sentiment vis-a-vis the United States is up and down, right?
Give me a break. I mean, come on.
Okay.
They declared war.
Robert Fife, folks. Yes.
They declared a trade war on Canada. The president says he wants Canada to be the 51st state. He's always insulting Canada. What do you think Canadians are going to do when they feel that we were close to the Americans, and then you have a president who treats Canada with such disdain? There's a reason why Canadians aren't going to the United States anymore, and there's a reason why we have that kind of anger, and it certainly isn't because we're anti-American. They've made us that. I just, you know, that guy is out to lunch.
I think he's speaking from a very wounded pride in the American administration, where they see that, you know, the threats of annexation didn't go over. They were the ones who talked about annexing us without a war, just economically and just taking away, making us the 51st state. But this administration is extremely vexed by the actions that the Canadians have taken on a individual political consumer level, from the premiers, the provincial and municipal levels, and from the federal government initially, right? They don't like being told that we're going to try and go it our own way or without you. And they thought it was going to be an easier romp, I think, but it's anything but.
I will say the one thing I trip on is a lot of the sentiment is grassroots sentiments. And I think there's something to be said. Perhaps political leaders need to take this under advisement, but to criticize the Canadian people for having feelings about something is
try to squash us, and we're supposed to just roll over.
Yeah.
The other cheek hit me in the face, but for Mr. Extra to say that, I think. First of all, Mr. Extra is very close to Mr. Trump. So what Mr. Extra says, I think you could say that matters. And you could say that Mr. Trump feels the same way. But clearly, like Mr. Trump, Mr. Extra seems to be living in a parallel universe. There was a story on CNN that was aired this week showing that Americans are now putting the Canadian flag on their bags when they travel abroad because of the cold reception they're getting everywhere. So it's not only in Canada, but it's pretty much a universal sentiment towards the United States right now, and it's a result of the policies of Mr. Trump.
I mean, myself, when I went to the United States this summer, and other people have gone, people are apologizing for the way that the Trump administration and the MAGA crowd have been treating Canada.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a distinction that perhaps the U.S. ambassador would hear. It's Canadians don't despise Americans.
No.
It's this political moment,
but again,
and what's happening to the economy.
It speaks to how the political perception of the White House is towards our tactics and our strategies. And lucky for the federal government that Canadians have taken aboard themselves to fight it as well. Had the call for Canadians to say, support each other and our own provinces, for example, in the vacation industry this summer, not change their travel plans. And if Canadians had continued to travel south, continued to buy American products, continued to take the flights and spend the money in the south, then why would they take us seriously on our threats to try and go this alone, or take them seriously at their word? So I think that there's a big political message there. It's working. Yeah. And I think that that's a good message for Canada.
Okay, let's stick on good message, because we have a new segment, Yeas and Nays, of what you thought was good, what you thought was a misstep of the past week. Beginning with the Yeas, what do you give a yay to this week, Bob?
I give a yay to the fact that Avi Lewis is going to run for the NDP leadership. He's from
announced Friday.
NDP. His grandfather and his father were very prominent NDP leaders. The NDP really needs to come back. They're on life support right now. I don't know whether he can win a seat in Parliament, but he's a very articulate, strong lefty, strong environmentalist. He will galvanize people on the left, particularly when you have a prime minister and a Liberal Party that has moved more to the center. I think he represents probably the best hope for the NDP, and I do think that the country needs that kind of a voice in Parliament.
Okay. Your yay?
Well, I mean, I second that, but I think maybe I'll give my yay to Chrystia Freeland in her letter saying she's going to step down, rejecting the political cliche, I'm leaving to spend more time with my family. Thank God for Chrystia Freeland for putting that to bed, because she said it was a privilege and a sacrifice for her, not a sacrifice, rather, a privilege for her and her family to do the jobs she's done over the past 12 years. She's done terrific jobs. She's been a really strong woman in the governments of two prime ministers, and she could have been, there were times when she enraged us all. She was a pain to cover sometimes, but she did a really hard job, really hard work, rather, on behalf of Canada. And I just loved that letter. I actually liked her letter when she resigned from Trudeau's cabinet, too. She speaks truths in political circles. Trudeau didn't like it so much, but yes. The prime ministers don't like it. And I'm betting that not only did the timing of that one land like a bomb, but the timing of this departure, too, was weird this week, right? She could have given it a few more weeks till they had all their ducks in a row. All the former Trudeau-era cabinet ministers who wanted to take their leave, who may or may not be going to diplomatic postings, whatever the case may be, they'd get by-elections lined up, and then November they could at least try to advance the budget, the initial stages of the budget through Parliament. But no, she's leaving now. Why is she leaving now? Who knows? There may be a little bit more to why she's leaving now than we know. But I loved the letter. I loved the statement.
Okay. Okay. And your yay?
My yay is to a former Conservative leader, Erin O'Toole, who rose above the fray to salute the contribution of Madame Freeland as a minister. Yes. And he got slammed on social media for that, but he is continuing where he left when the House of Commons, he made his last speech. He said we need to rise above the cliques of the social media. We need to bring back dignity to the House. We have a role to play. And so even outside the House, Mr. Erin O'Toole is continuing what he said in the House of Commons. So kudos to Mr. Erin O'Toole. And he was, I think, the only one among the Conservative movement, if I may say, to say those things about Mr. Freeland. Being in politics is tough, challenging. You make sacrifices. And it's especially for women in politics these days. So I commend Mr. O'Toole for rising above the fray.
Okay. So listen, less than 5 minutes. Quick round on what your nays are of this first week. Bob?
I'm going to say Jimmy Kimmel, what happened in the United States. And on the heels of Stephen Colbert, what we're seeing is a president who is willing to use very strong regulatory powers to go after the media, and of all people, comedians. And the worst part about it, billionaire media barons are bending down on their knees to support him on this, and this is extremely frightening for free speech in the United States, and God knows it could have some repercussions here at some point as well.
Okay. Tonda?
I mean, Ambassador Hoekstra's comments, I think we've already discussed. So in the interest of time, I would have said that's probably not the most diplomatic thing he's said since he's come.
Okay. And that's a diplomatic way of saying that.
I'm up for, I don't know, some posting, I'm sure. Not so much.
My nay goes to Prime Minister Mark Carney for refusing to tell Canadians 6 months into the fiscal year how big will be the deficit for the current fiscal year. I think he's got an obligation to tell us where the state of the finances is going. And also, talking about Mr. Carney, my nays is also because he's not releasing anything he says in private to Mr. Trump. Textos and phone calls between the president and the prime minister, that we should have a readout from his office on that one.
Transparency. Transparency. Okay, quick go around. Look ahead for next week.
Oh my goodness. Well, the Prime Minister is going to be at the United Nations, and this is his first time, I believe, at the United Nations, so we'll watch to see...
As Prime Minister.
I'm sorry, the Prime Minister, to see how well he performs.
Yeah.
Yeah, UNGA, the General Assembly, absolutely. How well he performs, who he's talking to. Right now on the schedule, there is no scheduled meeting with Donald Trump. Does he talk to him? What do they talk about? What is the next step in these trade talks?
Same thing, but also I'll add to that whether more Liberal MPs will be leaving their ship. More appointments, diplomatic appointments. We may expect Mr. Blair or Mr. Jonathan Wilkinson being appointed to diplomatic posts, so that's something I'll be watching.
We might be facing a by-election sooner than we think, the way things are going.
Cleaning out the barn.
Yeah, he is. Okay, here is my look ahead for next week. This was episode 1 of our new podcast. Looking forward to episode 2. Thank you for this, the three of you. Robert, thank you. Robert Fife, the audio bureau chief for the Globe and Mail. Tonda MacCharles, audio bureau chief for the Toronto Star. Joël-Denis Bellavance, audio bureau chief for La Presse. Thank you, the three of you. We are back with the bureau chiefs next Friday.